Hi, I'm Dave Hilowitz. So first off, I wanted to thank everybody who purchased the PhonoHarp sample. I've already made $600 of donations, and I'm sure a lot more will be coming soon. So yeah, really excited. Okay, so onto this video. In this video, I wanted to kind of cover how to do basic scripting for piano samples. Piano samples are like deceptively complicated. You know, if you think about it, it should be so simple, right? It's just a big machine with buttons on it, and you press the buttons and sounds come out. And how could it possibly be so complicated? As we'll see, 90% of the difficulty that comes with scripting piano samples has to do with that darn sustain pedal. Yeah, there are just a whole bunch of complicated edge cases that all need to be thought about. So yeah. Let's dive in. By the way, the samples I'm going to be working today were recorded by Andrew Finch, and they come from his fantastic Schimmel library. Link below. It's on Piano Book. So before we get started, we need to talk about all the different kinds of samples that go into a piano sample library. So for starters, there's the basic note, right? Just the regular note without the pedal. Next, you've got the sound that the piano makes when you've got the sustain pedal pressed down, which is not quite the same. It sounds a little bit different. So we'll call that notes with pedal. Next, you've got the sound that the keys make when you let up on them. We're going to call those release triggers. Then you've got the sound that the pedal makes when it goes down. And then finally, the fifth group is you've got the sound that the pedal makes when it comes back up. So that's 5 groups. And then, of course, if you have round robins for any of those, you can multiply the number of groups by the number of round robins. So 4 round robins, and instead of having 5 groups, you now have 20 groups to work with. So yeah, suddenly this instrument that seems like so simple at the outset is just like monumentally complicated to script. Okay, so let's dig in. We're going to start with just 2 groups, the plain notes group, which I'm calling notes without pedal, and then we've got notes with the pedal pressed down. So pretty basic. And at this point, we don't actually need any scripting whatsoever. So by default, if I play a chord, both of the groups are going to sound. So we need to obviously prevent that from happening. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into group start options, and we're going to go to group starts, start on controller. You know, there are a couple things worth mentioning here. First, the sustain pedal is, of course, a continuous controller, a MIDI continuous controller with an ID of 64, CC64. That's a standard value for like a sustain pedal. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that Kontakt's start on controller option doesn't do what it says it does. So it does not start this note playing when you hit that controller. All this does is it filters which groups are available based on whether or not that controller is down. So right now, if CC64 is between 0 and 127, it will play this group. Well, as you probably know, 0 through 127 is the full range. So regardless of the position of that sustain pedal, this group is going to play. So what we want to do is we want to actually lower this down to 64. So 0 through 64 to half its range. And generally, the way sustain pedals work is they output 0 when the pedal's up, and they output 127 when the pedal's down. However, there are fancy pedals that will output like half presses and things like that, and that's why we use these ranges. So if they come in with like 78, we basically treat it as though the pedal's down. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to note with pedal, and we're going to set up that same controller, and actually it's already set up 64 to 127. So actually this should probably be 63 because we don't want any overlap in those ranges. So now if I play the notes, you see how only that first group triggered. And now I'm going to press down on the pedal. And there, our second group is triggered. So that's obviously a very basic case. We didn't have to do any scripting. So now's where things get more complicated. We're going to add release triggers in. And by default, Kontakt supports those as well. We don't need to do any scripting for release triggers, except there's a bug. And we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to import a group, which is already set up here, release triggers. And we can see it's group number 2. Remember, group numbering starts at 0, so 0, 1, and 2. In fact, I'm actually going to open up the automation window, or the expert window, so we can see a list of groups. As you can see, this group is already configured to be only triggered when the pedal is up, and it is also set up as a release trigger. So in theory, everything works. And you can see the release triggers being triggered there every time I let up on the keys. However, there's this very annoying bug in Kontakt, and it's a bug that dates back to Kontakt 2, I believe, or maybe even earlier. And the reason they haven't fixed the bug is because it would break all the old Kontakt instruments to fix it. The deal with this bug is if you're in this position where you press down on some keys, you press down on the pedal, thereby triggering sustain, you press down on some more keys and then let up on the sustain pedal, it treats that as though you had just let up on all of those notes throughout the entire time that you had the sustain pedal down. When you experience this bug, it can be pretty bad. So yeah, we need a script to fix this. So the script that everybody has used, basically going back about 15 years, was written by a guy named Niels Lieberg, or Lieberg, I actually don't know how you pronounce his name. He is one of these like veteran Kontakt coders. He wrote one of the early third-party manuals for like how to do KSP scripting. On his website, which is showing its age a little bit, he's got this wonderful release trigger bug fix, which you can download here. Essentially what it does is it keeps track of whether or not the sustain pedal was pressed down when the initial notes were played. And if it was pressed down, it doesn't trigger the release triggers. So yeah, it's a sort of a clever bit of trickery that gets around the problem. So yeah, we're gonna bring that in right here. And as you can see, it's got a little box up here, which we'll get rid of in a second. Get rid of that already. Don't really need it. Niels' little box. Okay, I'm gonna actually bring this into Sublime Text so that I can work with it a little bit better. Okay, so there's his script. We hit apply, we try to play it. So I'm gonna play some notes. Okay, I'm gonna let up on the pedal now. And okay, it did not make any kind of release trigger. And now if it's playing the release triggers as normal. So basically the sustain pedal and the release triggers get out of each other's way, and we don't have any kind of like weird collision that causes all these release triggers to get triggered all of a sudden. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. We've got 3 groups. And now basically the only piece of the puzzle that we need to add in is those pedal sounds. So like when I press down on the pedal, I actually have a sound that I want to play every time the pedal goes down, and I have another sound that I want to play every time the pedal goes up. So this is where we need to do some more serious scripting, and we're going to actually integrate our script work into Niels' script so that we get kind of a combined script that does everything we want it to in one place. So I've brought Niels' script in here, and I'm going to bring in the samples, kind of important, and I'm going to import the groups. We got pedal down, which we can see is group 3, and I'm going to import pedal up. That's group 4. And now it is time for us to do some scripting. Obviously, by default, if I play this, it's playing the pedal down and pedal up samples along with the correct note groups. So that's what we need to fix. So for starters, we want to make sure that Niels' script, this release trigger script, doesn't turn on our samples, which are really meant to be manually triggered. And by manually triggered, I mean that Kontakt's default triggering engine shouldn't try to play them at any point. We're going to actually make our own on-controller callback. And every time we receive a controller message, like pedal down or pedal up, we're going to determine whether or not we want to play the note. So we don't want Kontakt to do anything. We also don't want Niels' script to do anything. In order to be able to modify Niels' script, we have to understand it a little bit. We don't need to worry too much about the release events, but we do need to worry about the on-note events. As we saw when I'm hitting notes, what's happening is all of the non-release trigger groups are playing. So what I actually want to do is I want to look at the part where groups are being disallowed and allowed and figure out how that works. So as we can see, within the on-note block, there's a disallow groups, and that's super common in Kontakt. You see one chunk of code disallowing all groups, basically turning off all groups, and then you've got another chunk of code after it, which is turning on some groups, and that's the way we select which groups actually play. So what this is doing is it's using this $i variable as like a kind of counter, as a way of just iterating through all of the groups and making decisions about which groups turn on and which don't. And specifically, it's using this if statement to make that decision. It's using get engine par, and it's asking the engine, is this a release trigger? And if it's a release trigger, it doesn't trigger it. In other words, Niels' script wants to manually control all of the release triggers. So it specifically is disallowing those from triggering within the onNote callback. We wanted to exclude the release triggers, of course, but we also wanted to exclude our pedal up and pedal down samples. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to declare an array way up at the top in the onInit block. And I'm actually going to pull up the manual for how to declare an array, which looks like this. Remember, an array is just a variable that stores multiple values in it. And in this case, we're going to store the numbers of groups that are manually triggered. So we're going to call this is the part where we do manually. I'm going to call this manually triggered groups. And right now we've got 2 groups that we really want to be manually triggered. And it says down here you can just do an assignment right like that. So we're going to do an assignment. Okay, and let's look back at Kontakt and let's look. Okay, our pedal down and pedal up groups are 3 and 4. So 3 and 4. We've now got this nice array that contains the numbers of the groups that we don't want Kontakt to mess with. Now we need to go down here and change this if clause, actually add more to it so that it excludes our manually triggered groups as well as the release triggers. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an extra set of parentheses around this, and I'm actually just going to get rid of this comment. And now that we've got this extra set of parentheses, we can put an and we're going to put our new condition here. And we can actually use a function that is defined in Kontakt for searching within arrays, and it's called search. I'll show you the function definition. And essentially what it does is it tells you whether or not something is present in the array. So we're going to take its signature and we're going to put it here. And the array variable is manually triggered groups. And the value is I. Now, what we're doing here is we're actually starting at 0, and then we're cycling through all of the groups. And for each of the groups, we're saying, is I a release trigger? And if it is, exclude it. And also, is I in this array, this new array that we just created called manually triggered groups? And if it is, we also want to exclude it. We've got our definition there, and we need to look back here. And it says, if the value is not found, the function returns -1. So that's actually what we need to test for. Because essentially, we only want to allow the group if the group is not found in manually triggered groups. I know this sounds complicated, but essentially, we're just trying to find out which groups are just regular notes, not release triggers, not pedal down, not pedal up. Okay, we've condensed this down to 1 line. Now I'm just going to bring it in and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to play a note, and we're going to make sure that specifically what we're looking for is that the pedal down and pedal up groups don't trigger when I play a chord. Okay, excellent. Seems to be working. Okay, now we need to write an onController callback so that when we actually press down on that pedal, it triggers the sample. So we're going to go back to Sublime Text, and I'm going to go up here and do onController. Oop, that was weird. And there are some sort of like magic variables that you get access to. ccnum, for example, tells us which continuous controller triggered the onController event. Can actually probably look this up. You can see here that here's the function definition for onController. It's pretty useful. And here you can see this is how we figure out the actual value that got passed in. And that's obviously super important. So we're going to do if this value is greater than 64, that means the pedal is down. And then this, we're going to put an else here. Okay. So we're actually going to declare another variable up here, and I'm just going to call it pedal down. And if pedal down is 0, and we're going to say pedal down is 1. We're going to do the same thing over here. A lot of nested if clauses. And if it's 1, then set it 0. Okay. And I'm actually going to do a little message test pedal down. And we'll do the same thing pedal up. These are actually not assignments. Okay, and I'm going to bring it into Kontakt just to make sure that everything is working. And I'm going to press down on the pedal now, and we should see a little message way down in the bottom of this window down here. Okay, there it is. Pedal down, and then I'm going to let up on the pedal. Pedal up. Okay, so it's working. So now our next step is we want to actually go into where we've detected that pedal down and pedal up are being pressed. We want to actually trigger a play note event, which is going to actually play the sample in question. So I'm going to pull up the function signature for play note. Okay, and okay, that's funny. The example that they're giving is actually how to trigger a MIDI note by pressing the sustain pedal. So yeah, it's amazing the useful things that you find in the Kontakt manual. Okay, we're just going to straight up copy that. Okay, and so we need to do something. You see here, they're setting the value, the return value for play note to this variable new ID. We haven't declared any variable called new IDs. They have up in their init block. So we need to do basically the same thing. And we're going to actually call it something a little bit better than that, I think. We're going to call it pedal down note ID. And we're going to need another one because we've also got a pedal up sample. So we are going to copy this and move it down here. And we're going to do the same thing down here, except we're going to call this pedal up note ID. And this should be actually note ID, not node ID, I'm noticing now. Okay, so there's another modification that we need to make, which is essentially, I mean, I'll paste this in and we can see what happens, but it's not going to be pretty. Okay, I'm going to press down on the pedal. So it played an actual note. It played all of the groups. And that's because when you, and I'm going to let up on the pedal, it's going to do it again. Essentially what's happening is when I do play note, we haven't done any of that disallow group, allow group nonsense that we do in onNote. All of the groups are actually available to be played, and it's playing all of the groups at the same time. We actually only want it to play one group. So we need to do disallow group and then allow group. Now within onController, you actually can't do disallow group and allow group. They're actually not available to you. That's actually a function that you can only use in onNote. So you need to do something weird. You need to actually set event parameters for play note that will cause it to basically behave the same way. You can do an allow group and a disallow group. You just can't use the function allow group and disallow group. It's pretty weird. I'll show you. We want to use a function called set event parameter, or par. This is the function we need. And as you can see, it takes a bunch of parameters, the ID number, which is just the note ID, the parameter, which in the example that they're giving is exactly the example that we're going to be using. And you'll find that often in the KSP reference manual where there'll be like a little bit of example code and it'll be exactly what you needed because so many of us are doing exactly the same thing when we're building instruments. So we're going to paste it in parameter by parameter. And so this is a little bit weird. First, we need to do disallow groups. Set event par array, I guess is what the AR are. The thing about it is it doesn't have a disallow. Basically what you do is you allow the group, but you set value to 0. And you can see down here it says if set to 1, the group set with group index will be allowed for the event. If set to 0, the group with group index will be disallowed for the event. So what we're doing is we're actually disallowing it. We're going to use a special value called all groups. So what this is doing is it's actually turning off all groups. And we can actually test to make sure that this is working correctly by bringing it into Kontakt. And we should basically not get any sound when I press down on the pedal now. I'm going to press down. Yeah, no groups triggered. Okay, going back into our editor, we're going to do another one of these. And this time we're going to actually allow the group that we want. And you notice we change a 0 to a 1. That's the difference between disallowing and allowing. And then this final parameter, which is group index, we want to populate that with the group index for our pedal down group, which is 3. So we're just going to put 3 here. And now we're going to paste this into Kontakt window, and I'm going to press down on the pedal. I'm going to have to look here because the AC is going, and I don't think I'm even going to be able to hear the pedal down sound. Okay, it triggered. So we basically want to do the same thing. The only change with the pedal up is we're changing that group to 4 to match the pedal up. Okay, let's give it a spin. Seems to work. Whew. So that was a trip, huh? So yeah, as I said, pianos, which should be so simple, are weirdly complicated in the world of Kontakt, just because there are just so many variables. They've got all these pedals. Things get even more complicated when you have round robins. This technique, of course, does work with Kontakt's round robin system, although there are some weird gotchas about it. For example, the release triggers actually step the round robin counter forward, which is kind of a mess. Okay, that is it. That was quite a trip. I'm going to take this script and put it into the description to this video so that hopefully somebody can make use of it. Probably you'll have to make some modifications to get it to work for your particular instrument, your particular case, but hopefully you won't have to re-implement everything. Okay, the instrument that I've been working on, the Andrew Finch Schimmel, can be downloaded from Piano Book. I highly recommend it. It's like 5 gigs. It's something of a heavy download. It's a deep sampling, but it's very beautiful. I especially like the sustains layer. I've been hearing it a lot in my headphones last week. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit like and subscribe. Subscribing is pretty much the only way to find out when I make a new video. I'm really bad at sending out those promo emails. Okay, I think that's it. See you next time.